Hey guys, Chris here with Marksman Shooting Sports and WeBuyGuns.com in Westfield, Indiana, and you are watching Marksman TV. Welcome back to another weekly used gun review. Remember, in these videos, we take about 6 used firearms that have come into our store, either through our website or the front door. I gave you guys about a 2 to 5 minute review on each to give you guys an idea of some different stuff out there on the market. So if that sounds interesting to you, please stick around. That's coming up now. Alright, this video is brought to you by our website, WeBuyGuns.com. If you are considering selling a firearm or firearms collection, please log on to our website, create an account, and from there you can submit your firearms for an offer request. Now with that offer, you will be provided with an offer certificate which you can take with you to competing gun stores in your area to try and leverage yourself a better deal. If you are unable to get a better deal, go ahead and sell them to us. We do provide you with a shipping label, and we will pay you with either a paper check or ACH direct deposit, whichever you prefer and is easiest for you. So please remember to check us out at WeBuyGuns.com. Alright guys, remember the format of this video was to start with most common and move through least common as the video progresses, starting us off with our first spot. This is a Spanish Star Model B 9mm, and this one comes to us from a customer here locally in Indiana. Now, a lot of you guys are probably noticing that this looks a lot like a John Moses Browning design 1911, and there's some reasons for that which we'll get into. But first, let's get into the formation of the company who manufactured this. This would be manufactured by the original Bonifacio Echevarria S.A. company based out of Spain, which was founded in the late 19th century by Jose Cruz Echevarria. Now, in 1905, he would actually bring his 2 sons into the company. They were Julian and Bonifacio. Now, their early success of the company was actually as a subcontractor for the Ruby pistols, which were supplied to France and Italy during the First World War. They were a very small frame 32 automatic pistol, and they were actually kind of overproduced. So by the time World War II had ended, there was not much of a desire for the Ruby pistols any longer. Furthermore, the 32 automatic was waning in popularity, instead in favor of the 9mm Parabellum designed by Georg Luger in Germany for the introduction of the P08 pistol in Germany, the Luger pistol adopted by German forces in 1908. So around this time in the sort of late World War I era, around 1914, they had actually come out with a second pistol design. Their first was the Pistola Modelo 1, or the Modelo 1905, model 1905, which saw pretty much no military adoption and very little success. But their second model, the 1914 pistol, was actually adopted by France and had a small military contract. And this would be the first sort of actual produced Star pistol that would see some military success. Now, in 1919, Julian would leave the company, leaving Bonifacio basically in charge. Now, riding the coattails of the success of the 1914 pistol, there was a reformation of the company in around 1920. Now, it was renamed the Star Bonifacio Echevarria S.A. Company. The reason for that is the model 1914 pistol had a star on it, and actually got dubbed the nickname the Star Pistol by the French soldiers who used it. So again, taking along into the success of that, they folded that nickname into the new name of the company, giving a lot of brand recognition to their successful 1914 pistol design adopted by France. Now in 1920, again, trying to go into the new 9mm design, Bonifacio had noticed that there was a lot of success off of the 1911 pistol design by John Moses Browning, so he would start by taking the 1911 and sort of copying it, but putting it both in the 9mm Largo, which was a popular round used in Spain at the time, and the 9mm Parabellum as an export model that was popular around the rest of Europe. Now, they would start with a new military model taking this formation, which would be produced in about 1920, 1921, and produced until about 1933. And this would actually see success with the Civil Guard in Spain, who wanted a couple tweaks, as in the original model had no grip safety, but they wanted to add a grip safety like the original 1911. Later, that was canned, and they would go back to this variation in the Model A. Now, in 1924, they would start production on the Model A. That would stay in production all the way up until about the 1980s, and it would take basically this formation. A year later, in 1925, they would come up with the Model B, which is what this is, which had a little bit more ergonomics on the grip. Now, these would stay in production with the company seeing some changes, mostly commercial changes, in the 60s and 70s, until about 1997, when the company would go out of business entirely. Now, through the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, these would actually be imported into the United States as military or commercial surplus, where they would see actually a lot of success due to their inexpensive price, the familiarity with the 1911 design, the cheaper 9mm ammunition. In fact, about 5 years ago, a lot of these Star BM pistols, a smaller frame version of this, hit the market, and those could be found at a very inexpensive price, around $250 to $350. Now, the Star Model B was also adopted by the German Armed Forces in 1944, and these would be supplied to the Germans as well, so you can find Star Model Bs with Waffen amps on them. And then actually to the Germans post-World War II, to the Bundeswehr, did have small contracts on the Star Model Bs as well, so a very steeped military history. On the market today, these can be found actually between about $300 and $500 depending on condition. Very affordable for what they are. Very cool history. Nice ergonomics because, again, it fits that 1911 styling, and they're just functional, very reliable pistols. So anyway, that'll start us off with our first one, the Star Model B. Okay, up next we have an interesting carbine that comes to us from a customer in Pennsylvania. So thank you so much for selling this one to us. This is a Beretta CX4 carbine. This one's chambered in 9mm. They were made also in 40 and 45 ACP. It is a closed bolt, straight blowback design, built mostly off of a polymer body or housing, if you will. Very, very light, ergonomic, and compact. Now, the idea for things like this would actually gain in a lot of popularity in the late 80s, early 90s. For both police use as well as civilian use, the idea of having a carbine that uses not only the same ammunition but the same magazines as your handgun is becoming to be a prominent one. Now, the market has somewhat been served by things like the Camp series of carbines from Marlin. So things like a Camp carbine in 45 that uses a 1911 magazine, or their 9mm that use the third generation Smith & Wesson magazines. It's sort of the first in the new era of PCC carbines, but by the 90s you have a lot of things like this that are starting to be developed. Ruger would be one of the first in the new wave of PCCs with the original PC carbine. You have High Point coming out with their models in the 1990s as well. Now, Beretta is also looking at this. At the time, they had the 92, 96 series Beretta, M9 pistols out on the market. And later, by about the late 1990s, early 2000s, they're developing the PX series, the PX4, later the Storm pistols, with their magazines. So in 2003, Beretta would answer the call with this version, the PX4. Now, they had the version that used the CX4, C for carbine, P for pistol. Now, the CX4 would use the PX4 magazines, as well as they had a version that used the M9 magazines, like this one here is actually that version. They're still manufactured today, and they have been met with some sort of lukewarm success. To my knowledge, there is no American police department who has adopted the CX4, but it has seen a fair amount of success in the civilian market. One of its biggest hindrances, though, is the aesthetics. It was the same with the PX4 pistol. A lot of people just do not like how they look. However, if you get a chance to pick one up and hold it, the ergonomics are actually very nice, and it's a very lightweight and very well-balanced carbine. Gosh, I keep keep confusing the two. And if you have a Beretta 92 and you or a PX4 and you want something that uses the same magazines, these are actually really cool. Now, in 2011, they would actually come out with a military version known as the MX4, which is a select fire submachine gun, using the same sort of exact design except for a slightly shorter barrel, obviously not worrying about the 16-inch length that we have here as a requirement in the United States. Based off of a closed bolt, straight blowback design just like this, with a 3-position selector, safe, semi, and full auto. It did see some limited military use with the Italian Navy as well as the Indian military, but again has not seen a lot of wide-scale international use, and it has been featured in some video games. Today, again, they are manufactured for the civilian market here in the United States with a brand new MSR price at about $899, but the actual street price you might find these things for new is about $700 to $800. Used, you're finding them around $500 to $600. So anyway, very interesting carbines. Very happy to get this one and share it with you, a Beretta CX4 Storm carbine. All right, up next is a very interesting and iconic carbine that comes to us from a customer in Illinois. So thank you so much for selling this one to us. This is a Czechoslovakian VZ24, this one chambered in 8mm Mauser. Now, the story with this would actually begin at the conclusion of the First World War, when the Austro-Hungarian Empire would be dismantled. Now, out of that would emerge a lot of new states, of which would include the current-day Czech Republic, or Czechoslovakia at the time. Now, like all new emerging states, they needed to have their own arms procurement program. They could either manufacture them domestically at home or license or purchase firearms from elsewhere. They decided to create their own arms manufacturing process. So in 1918, they would implement the Brno Arms Works plant. Now, at first, it would be owned by Czechoslovakia, but later it would be privatized to encourage the exportation of their rifle designs. Now, one of their first designs actually came about in 1922 and was heavily modeled after the Gewehr 98 rifle. I actually happen to have one right here. This is a 98-22 rifle. 98 for the Gewehr 98 and 22 for 1922, the year it would go into production at the Brno plant. Now, a lot of these would actually, be used and would sort of be the original design for the Mauser action. It takes a lot of heavy influence off of the World War I era because it has a much longer design, as you can see. A lot of these would be exported to places like Turkey. Many of them chambered in 8mm Mauser, but they would make them in other calibers as well, depending on who they were exporting to. Now, that would stay as the mainstay in Czech service. However, in the interwar period, a lot of countries around the world are starting to determine that they do not need the long battle rifle, the long, heavy, cumbersome length rifle that's capable of shooting out, to 1,000 meters and things like that. That they need something that's a little bit more compact, easy to produce, easier to carry and use, with an effective range of maybe around the 500 to 700 meter mark. So a lot of countries are moving into carbine variants of their rifles as standard issue. You're seeing this in Switzerland with the movement from the original Mannlicher rifle design down to the K11 shortened versions and later the K31. We're seeing this in Japan with the movement from the 38 long rifle down to the 38 carbine and later the Type 99. The United States and Great Britain had always had sort of a carbine length with the Enfield and Springfield designs. Germany has shortened versions of their Gewehr 98s. Later, they would go into the 98K. So this is the way the world is heading, and Czechoslovakia would follow suit. In 1924, they would come out with this version, a simplified, shortened, scaled-down version of their original 1922 model. And this was actually a very, very, very good iteration off of the Mauser design. They would export these to a lot of countries like China, Romania, for example, and even the Germans would actually fold a lot of these into military service after 1938 of the occupation of Czechoslovakia. So when Germany would go into Czechoslovakia in 1938, just like they would with every country they occupied, they would keep producing the firearms and fold those firearms into German military service. Now, this would actually be adopted in this configuration by the Germans pre-World War II in 1938 as the Gewehr 24T. Now, they would continue over the period of production of this in the late 1930s, adding modifications to the rifle to make it feel more like their original 98K design. They would put sling slots in the stock, just like they would do with the K98s, and they would put the takedown disc in it, some other things, modifications on the sides. Now, finally, in 1942, these would be discontinued from production at Brno because it was forced to be so by the German occupiers of Czechoslovakia. And in 1942, Brno would become one of the additional companies that would manufacture the original K98 design. So you can get a World War II K98K with the Brno factory designation markings on it, which at the time the code was DOT. And Brno would actually produce other German small arms like the MG34, for example, as well. These, again, would go on to have a very good legacy as being a very high quality, very well manufactured Mauser variant, and people love them today on the surplus market because of that. Now, on the market today, these are not overly expensive. If you're getting an original Gewehr 24T with the Waffen-AMP acceptance marks, those are going to be the most expensive, and those will easily top $1,000. But something like this in this condition is military surplus. This has been refurbished. You're typically in about the $500 to $700 range, depending on condition and everything. So for the money, they make excellent collectibles, really fun on the range. So anyway, glad to get that one in and share it with you guys. That is a VZ24. Okay, up next is a very interesting pistol that comes to us from a local customer. This is a pretty rare pistol. This is a Belgian Browning model 1971, also known as the 1071. Now, the name would harken back to its original design by FN in Belgium, known as the model 1910. Now, the 1910 was a very small frame pistol, looked a lot like this, kind of shorter like this, though, chambered in .32 automatic. This is around the turn of the century. There is a growing demand, especially in Europe, for personal defense carry pistols chambered in lower calibers like 25 and 32 automatic. Now, the 1910 would be derived. Other companies like Mauser in Germany would come out with things like the 1904. Sauer had their 1913 pistol. So around this sort of early 1910s, late 19 teens time frame, a ton of these small frame 32s are coming out on the market. Now, one of the things that makes the 1910 actually very infamous is it was actually used by Gavrilo Princip, who was a revolutionary of a group called the Black Hand out of Sarajevo, who actually would murder Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife of Austria, which would actually be the sort of spark in the powder keg that would ignite the First World War. So the original 1910 was very instrumental in that historic event happening. Now, the 1910 model would actually see a lot of use as a personal defense carry firearm, and in the 1920s it would actually be redesigned with a longer barrel. It would actually have a barrel lug extension at the end, which would give it kind of more of this profile, maybe even a little bit longer, and that was known as the Model 1922 or the 1022. Now, those would actually be imported into the United States as commercial concealed carry pistols, although by about the late 1960s, they were becoming very outdated compared to other things that were on the market, again, still chambered in .32 automatic. Now, in 1968 in the United States, the GCA, the Gun Control Act, is passed. With that, it puts a point valuation system on imported handguns, which it would have to exceed a certain point value to be allowed to be imported. Small frame pistols like the 1022 or 1922, as well as the original PPK, would be caught up in this net and could no longer be imported into the market. Now, the PPK would come out with a PPKS, with Walther giving a longer frame to get around this, and FN in Belgium would actually come out with a new model in 1971. Technically, these would start being produced in 1970. But they would call it the Model 1971 to give it features that would meet the points requirements that were imposed by the 1968 GCA. Caliber is now in .380. It has a slightly longer barrel. It has a longer grip. They put target sights on it, target grips. All these things add points to allow it to be importable into the United States. By 1971, they are now coming into the United States in this revised version, the 1071. However, again, because the 1022 version was the 1910/22, not to confuse it with the Ruger rifle, was already waning in popularity, this did not see a lot of commercial success anyway. Why they went through the trouble to create a new importable version of an already sort of failing pistol, I don't know. But the sales of these were not stellar. These would only be produced until about 1974, giving them a production run of about 4 or 5 years before they would be discontinued by FN. But anyway, because of that, not very many of these were made. This particular one was made in 1972, so right there in the middle of production. Excellent condition pistol. So anyway, the market value on these, again, because even though they are rare and they are from a popular company, FN in Belgium, they are still not exceedingly expensive. You could find these based on condition between about $500 and $700. So anyway, very cool pistols. Very happy to get this one in and share it with you. The Belgian Browning FN Model 1971. All right, up next we have an iconic and beautiful Colt revolver. This one coming to us from a customer in Wyoming. So thank you so much for selling this one to us. This one needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce it anyway. This is the Colt Python 357. This one in a beautiful blued finish with a 4-inch barrel. And this one specifically was made in the 1990s. I think we dated it to about 1995, 1996. Kind of towards the tail end of production. Beautiful, like I said, the kind of the midnight blue finish. This one doesn't even really have a turn line on it. Gorgeous condition. Okay, the Colt Python. Everybody who is into firearms knows about the Colt Python, probably one of the most iconic and actually most collected revolvers, especially coming from Colt. Okay, so the story with this actually begins, we can go back to the tail end and the conclusion of the Second World War. Colt had been involved in World War II arms production, most notably with the 1911 A1 pistol, and what a lot of domestic arms manufacturers have learned about World War II production was assembly line production, manufacture, and part standardization. So we see in the commercial market after World War II from companies like Winchester and Colt and Smith & Wesson, a lot of attention is put into part standardization and mass production of their commercial firearms, and that's what we start to see through about the late 1940s, early 1950s. Furthermore, Smith & Wesson also enjoyed military contracts and was starting to inch in, especially in the revolver market that Colt had been dominating prior to the Second World War. So Colt said, okay, we're going to come out with a flagship revolver that will be mass-produced and is going to show off the ingenuity and brilliance of the Colt manufacturing company, will be affordable by most, but something that we can really come out with that's going to sort of knock everybody's socks off. By the way, Smith & Wesson's thinking the exact same thing. And in 1955, both companies would come out with a new revolver. Colt would come out with the Python line. Smith & Wesson would come out with the Model 29, later known as the Dirty Harry Special of the .44 Magnum. Now, the Model 29 was in the 44 mag. The Colt Python, by and large, was in 357. They did have a short run of production target models that were chambered in 38 special only, but by and large, 95+% of the Colt Pythons were in 357. Now, prior to 1955, Colt had tasked Al Gunther to come up with this design. Okay, we're going to have, this nice lugged barrel. We're going to have this really nice, originally they called it Python blue, later it was changed to midnight blue, very high polished finish. Later they would come out with nickel and bright stainless and brushed stainless and things like that, but it would start in this design. And it was going to be something that could be targeted to the advanced enthusiasts, and actually they had an early interest in entering into police markets as well, and some police departments did go with the Colt Python. Now, when production would start in 1955, Colt gave exclusive manufacturing rights to two of Colt's master and probably most senior gunsmiths. They were Al DeJean and Dan Bedford. Colt wanted every single Colt Python that went through final assembly would go through the hands of either one or both of those gentlemen and nobody else. So between 1955 and 1957, that's exactly who did final fit, finish, and assembly on these firearms. Now, through about 1958 up to about the 1980s, Colt would actually allow, again, other gunsmiths to come in and do final fit, finish, and assembly on their revolvers, but they had to be more senior, about a minimum of 9 years experience with Colt. Even if you wanted to do final finish on the firearm, final polishing, you would have to go to Colt's final polishing camp and again have at least 9 years experience on other products that Colt was making before you were allowed to lay hands on the Python. So they were very guarded with the final appearance and presentation of these revolvers. They're very finely tuned. I don't want to turn the cylinder on this one. Smooth as glass action. The parts would be machined a little bit oversized, and they would be hand stoned and hand honed in, filed down to fit, again by hand. These were handmade firearms. Now, by about the late 1980s, the cost of labor is going up. You have a lot of production being brought in from other countries. You're sort of exporting foreign labor, if you will. And you have the advancement of modern machinery. By about the 1990s, CNC machinery can actually precisely manufacture the parts down to a very small margin of error, where the whole final hand fitting and hand finishing isn't really being used by a lot of arms manufacturing companies anymore. So if you start hiring these master gunsmiths, who are very expensive because of their quality of their craft, to do things that can otherwise be done on machines at a lot of a cheaper price, you start getting into a price point on the revolver that doesn't make sense anymore when compared to its contemporaries, its competitors that are out there available on the market as well. So by about the 1990s, Colt saw the writing on the wall. They didn't want to give up the sort of mystique of the handmade by master gunsmith allure of the Python. So about 1997, they start transitioning it over to the custom shop, where they would only be made to order. So by about 1999, they're in the custom shop. They would be produced there for 6 years until about 2005. When actually one of the final Colt Pythons would be the 50th anniversary edition of the Python line, and then it would be scrapped altogether. No more Pythons in 2005. Now in 2020, Colt would reignite the line with the 2020 Python. Of course, that one is all machine made, not hand fitted or anything like that, but still a very nice firearm. But we've done comparison videos on those before. You can definitely feel the differences, but they're very nice for what they are. Now when these would be released, they would be sold for about $137. So adjusting for inflation, that's just shy of about $2,000 today in today's dollars. So for a hand fit firearm in 1955, you are paying the equivalent of about $1,800 or so, which is actually still more expensive than what the modern 2020 Pythons are going for today. But I think the quality is unmatched. Beautiful firearm. Again, very happy to get these in. Now, the pricing on Pythons is all over the place. Let's just consider 1955 to about 1998 or 1999. Depending on what they come with, original condition and boxes and everything, as they get older, they start to detract a little bit in value, especially after about 1985. So I would say, 1985 to 1999, depending on what it comes with, condition, finish, and all that sort of stuff, you're probably about $1,500 to $2,500 or so. Really early ones, especially 1955 to 1957, especially in excellent condition, those can top north of $3,000. There are more rare barrel length variations regulations, you know, a 2.5 inch or a 3.5 inch is going to be more valuable than a 4 or a 6 inch, which are much more common. So they are all over the place, just say between $1,500 and $4,000, depending on what it is. The 2020 models, I don't even put in the same camp in terms of valuing. Those are pretty easy. Those are around, you know, the $1,000 to $1,400, depending on condition, sort of thing. So anyway, beautiful Revolver. Very, very happy to get this, and I always love getting in a Colt Python. So there is that one for you. Okay, last but definitely not least is a really cool firearm that comes to us from a local customer. This is an American 180. It is chambered in 22 LR. It feeds from a 177 round Pan magazine. This is an open bolt transferable machine gun. As the name would suggest, it does fire from the open bolt position. A really cool firearm. Now, the history with this would actually begin back in the 1960s with Richard Casull. He is the designer and developer of the 454 Casull cartridge that we all know and love today. Now, he would come out with a version of this known as the M290. Sort of like a prototype. It definitely had its quirks and its differences. And it actually was somewhat of a commercial flop. Only about 80 units would be manufactured and sold. Now, the American Arms Company would actually take over the design of this and come out with a modernized version. It has a very high cyclic rate of 1200 RPM. And because of its compact, lightweight nature and the fact that it has a very high cyclic rate and a very sub-caliber, it was actually a concept that they tried to pitch to law enforcement. The idea being is that with the sheer volume of fire, you could take out any type of threat that might come at you from somebody with a handgun or a rifle or anything like this. Because you can have low recoil, you can keep your sights on target, you're not moving all over the place, you can deliver 40, 50, 60 rounds of concentrated 22 LR fire on a target in a matter of seconds, drastically overwhelming a perpetrator who's shooting back at the law enforcement officer. Now, unsurprisingly, that pitch did not take off too well with law enforcement around the country. However, a couple police departments did go ahead and adopt the American 180 in the 1970s. There was a police department in Florida who actually, a couple police officers had an American 180, got in a shootout with 2 robbery suspects. They actually ended up incapacitating one and killing the other, and both police were unharmed. So it actually proved to be a very viable firearm that could deliver very high superiority of fire on a target. The other was the Utah Department of Corrections. It was purchased to be used as a last resort crowd control firearm. Of course, if you're being overrun and mobbed by an angry prison population, having something that could dispense 177 rounds of 22 LR in a matter of seconds would be a good last resort. However, to my knowledge, these were never used in that regard. None of them were ever fired in anger. They were just kept in inventory for a few years. Now, these would be produced by the American Arms Company between 1972 and 1986. In 1986, we have the passing of the GCA, which stipulated that no new machine guns could be produced for the commercial market. Because this was not as successful with law enforcement, there were a lot of civilian purchasers who would buy these and enjoy them, again, because it's a machine gun and a very inexpensive caliber. But because of the 1968 GCA, these could be no longer sold to civilians. So it would kind of put the kibosh on the American 180, and sales would, of course, disintegrate, and they would, stop going into production. Now, these would be manufactured after 1986, in a semi-automatic configuration, but they were not very popular. A company called E&L actually manufactures them today. They are made to special order, and they are known as the SAR 180-275. So you could actually purchase one today if you wanted one in a semi-automatic configuration, or you could find a transferable version like this and have one in the full auto configuration. Now, like all other transferable machine guns, these are quite expensive. Something like this, the American 180s are going anywhere from about, I've seen prices, of course, over the years they fluctuate, but between about $12,000 on the very low end to about $20,000 on the very high end, and anywhere in between. So, very cool firearms. Obviously, very happy to get this one and share it with you guys. I will do some shooting videos with this so you guys can sort of see it run. That's kind of what makes this very, unique and impressive, is it's a very high cyclic rate. So, anyway, stay tuned for those. But that'll end us off with this video, an American 180. Well, guys, that is all the time I have for you today on these. Thank you so much for stopping by and checking out this video. If you enjoyed, please let me know by hitting that like button. Please also consider subscribing to my channel and hit that bell notification button so you are aware when we are posting new content. I'm going to leave you guys off with that. I am Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports and WeBuyGuns.com in Westfield, Indiana. You are watching Marksman TV, and I will see you next time.